A prison doctor has just dropped a bombshell about Diddy's health, and the truth is shocking. Reports suggest a secret medical diagnosis that no one saw coming. Is Diddy really battling HIV behind bars? Stay tuned as we uncover the jaw-dropping details. Whispering Walls Prison moves to its own rhythm, speaks in its own silent code. Every noise, every shift in routine, every glance exchanged in passing, none of it is random. A guard hesitating by a door, an inmate switching seats, a murmured conversation in the shadows. These are signals. And if you know how to read them, one message is loud and clear: something's wrong with Diddy. I first caught wind of it in the chow hall, where gossip spreads faster than the slop on our trays. It wasn't just talk. It was the way people spoke, the way heads turned in his direction but never lingered too long. A quiet awareness filled the room, a tension beneath the surface. Something was off. Diddy wasn't in his usual spot. He always carried himself with an unshakable presence, like prison walls didn't apply to him. But today he had shifted, just a few feet closer to the wall, further from the center of the room. Small, almost unnoticeable. But in here, small things matter. I passed by with my tray and stole a glance. He looked different. It took me a second to figure out why, but then I saw it. His skin, usually slick with an almost untouchable glow, looked dull. His hands, resting on the table, seemed thinner, veins more pronounced. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. A guy at the next table nudged his cellmate, his chin tilting in Diddy's direction. "Yeah," the other muttered, barely parting his lips. "Moving slow, like he's hurting." Their words stuck. I had seen it too. Diddy's walk lacked its usual confidence. He wasn't carrying himself with the same easy swagger, the kind that made it seem like he still ruled the place. Today he moved with caution, stiff, measured, like every step cost him something. Subtle, but in prison, subtlety screams the loudest. The yard hummed with the same quiet unease. Near the weight benches, the whispers continued. "Man ain't right," one guy muttered, shaking his head. "Swear I saw his hands shaking. Tried to hide it, but I caught it." "Y'all reaching," another shot back. "He's just getting old. Knees probably done from all that running back in the day." "That don't explain how he looks," the first guy insisted. "He ain't just old. He's sick. I know sick when I see it." And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about Diddy slipping. It wasn't just a bad day or a rough week. People weren't just watching him, they were waiting. Waiting to see if he was weak. Because in here, weakness is a death sentence. There's an unspoken rule behind these walls: never let them see you struggle. The moment you do, it's only a matter of time before someone takes advantage. Diddy had built his reputation on strength, on control. Fear was his currency. But fear fades fast when people stop believing there's something to be afraid of. The next day, I barely saw him. That only made the whispers grow louder. In a place like this, when someone starts disappearing, the stories fill the gaps. Ain't been eating right. Been in medical more than usual. Dude's scared. He knows he ain't gonna last much longer. By the end of the week, speculation had turned into certainty. Some said it was an infection. Others thought he was faking, hoping for a transfer. But the ones who spoke in hushed tones believed the worst. Whatever was happening, it was real. It was serious. And he wasn't coming back from it. At first, I didn't buy into it. This was Diddy. Even in here, he had money, connections. The kind that got you better food, better treatment, better protection. But money couldn't hide the weight dropping from his face. It couldn't stop the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. Something was happening. And the worst part? He knew it too. That night, on my way back to my cell, I spotted him near the front of the block. He was talking to a CO, not in his usual loud, commanding way, but quiet, almost cautious. I couldn't hear the words, but the CO's posture said it all: impatience, dismissal, like this was a conversation he'd had before and didn't care to have again. Diddy's hands stayed buried in his pockets. His shoulders hunched ever so slightly. A defensive stance. A posture of someone who wasn't used to being ignored. And that's when it hit me. For the first time since he got locked up, Diddy wasn't in control. And in here, that's the first step toward losing everything. The air inside MDC always felt heavier after sundown. The daytime chaos shouting, doors slamming, footsteps echoing through the halls faded into something quieter but sharper. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that made you listen harder, made you more aware of the space around you. At night, even the smallest disturbance felt bigger, more significant. And that's exactly what happened the night Diddy disappeared. They moved him later than usual. Transfers happened during daylight, under full protocol, with the clatter of chains, barked commands, and inmates lined up in full view. But this wasn't a normal transfer. It was quiet. Too quiet. I wasn't asleep, just drifting in that in-between space, when I heard the soft shuffle of shoes on concrete. Not the heavy boots of night guards making rounds. Something else. Lighter. Purposeful. Intentional. I rolled over, pressing my head against the cold metal bed frame, trying to hear better. A door buzzed open, its mechanical whine slicing through the stillness, followed by footsteps more than one set. The voices that followed were low, firm, clipped in a way that didn't match the usual night shift. That's when I knew something was happening. In prison, routine is everything. The moment something feels off, you pay attention. I sat up, and I wasn't the only one. A rustling spread through the block, quiet, cautious. Heads lifted from pillows. Eyes peered through bars. Nobody wanted to be obvious, but we were all watching, all listening. And then I saw him. Diddy. Head down. Hands cuffed in front, not behind the kind of restraint they use for medical runs. But there hadn't been any talk of a medical transfer. I shifted for a better look, but he never glanced up. The usual arrogance, the untouchable confidence gone. His face was tight, drawn, like a man carrying a truth he wasn't ready to speak. The COs weren't rough, but they weren't lingering either. Their movements were quick, efficient, too smooth. That's how you know they're keeping something quiet. No unnecessary words. No explanations. Just motion. The door buzzed again, and just like that, he was gone. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence thickened, pressing in with unspoken questions. In here, you don't ask outright. You wait. You listen. You put the pieces together. But the questions were already circling. Why so late? Why so secretive? If it was just a checkup, why not use the prison infirmary? It didn't take long for the rumors to spread, passed from cell to cell like contraband. He's been sick, maybe it's serious. Nah, he's faking, trying to get out. When the official explanation finally trickled down, it was almost laughable, a routine MRI for an old knee injury. No one believed it. We'd seen guys with worse injuries, worse conditions, and they never got midnight hospital runs. They got ibuprofen and a shrug. And even if it was just a knee scan, why the secrecy? Why not during normal hours? By morning, the block was alive with speculation. Whispers had turned into full-blown theories. Some swore he looked frail when they took him, like his shoulders had shrunk overnight. Others claimed his hands trembled when he picked up his tray at chow. And then there were the ones convinced it was all an act, a legal strategy to appear weak, sick, unfit for prison, angling for a transfer or house arrest. The stories twisted and overlapped, shifting with each retelling. But at the center of it all was one undeniable truth: Diddy wasn't the same. When they brought him back later that morning, the air shifted. The COs weren't talking. Their faces were set in careful neutrality. No eye contact, no jokes, just a little more distance than usual. And Diddy? He looked drained. Hollow. Like something had been taken from him overnight. He didn't say a word. Not to his people. Not to anyone. He just walked to his cell, lay down on his bunk, and turned his back to the world. That's when the real rumors started. The first real signs of something worse had begun to show. It wasn't just whispers anymore, it was in the way Diddy carried himself, or rather, the way he didn't. He had always commanded space, even in cuffs, even stripped of the power he once had. There was a presence in the way he moved, a confidence built over years of having people answer to him. But now, that presence was fading. The days after his late-night hospital trip were eerily quiet. Diddy keeping to himself wasn't normal. Even when he wasn't speaking, he had always made sure to be seen, positioning himself in ways that reminded everyone his name still carried weight. But now, he was shrinking. At first, the shift was subtle. He stopped going to the yard as much, stopped sitting at his usual tables. He had always been careful about who he spoke to, but now, he barely spoke at all. And when he did, his words were short, clipped, stripped of that smooth, practiced rhythm he once had. The younger inmates, the ones who hadn't been around when he first came in, didn't notice the difference. But the ones who had been there longer, they saw it. By the end of the first week, there was no denying it, Diddy was losing weight. Not the kind that comes from skipping a few meals, but the kind that happens when something deeper is eating away at you. His jumpsuit hung looser, fabric gathering at the shoulders and waist where it hadn't before. His cheekbones sharpened, his skin lost its glow. He didn't look sick, yet. But he wasn't the same. Some chalked it up to stress, and it made sense. His entire world had collapsed in a matter of months. Private jets and penthouses traded for steel bunks and guards who didn't care who he used to be. That alone could break most men. But for the ones who had seen bodies deteriorate inside these walls, they knew it was more than stress. It was in the way he moved. Diddy had always walked like a man in control, even when the trial dates were set and the media was tearing him apart. But now, his steps were slower, more deliberate, like he was measuring every movement, painfully aware of how much effort it took just to keep going. One day in the Chow Hall, I saw him sitting alone, something that almost never happened. He'd always had people around him, not friends, just those close enough to be useful. But now, no one sat with him. Whether it was his choice or theirs, I couldn't tell. He picked at his food, barely eating, his hands resting on the table. That's when I noticed it, the trembling. Subtle, almost unnoticeable, but there. When he caught people looking, he pulled his hands into his lap. A guy nearby scoffed, dude acting like he got something. His cellmate, an older guy who had done 15 years, just shook his head. That ain't acting. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just prison gossip anymore. People were starting to believe it. And once that belief took hold, things only got worse. Diddy stopped touching things directly, using his sleeves to open doors, pressing buttons with his knuckle instead of his fingertip. He drank only from sealed bottles, avoided the communal fountain, washed his hands constantly, sometimes even wiping them inside his shirt after shaking hands. Some laughed it off, saying, "He think he too good for us." Others didn't laugh. They'd seen this before. One lifer, a man who had spent time in multiple prisons, leaned against the wall one afternoon, watching Diddy pass. He shook his head and muttered, "You ever seen a man start fading? That's what it looks like." No one answered. No one wanted to. The next week, Diddy stopped showing up altogether, skipping rec time, skipping meals. One night, when the COs made their rounds, I caught a glimpse into his cell. He wasn't asleep, wasn't reading, wasn't watching TV. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, like even existing took too much effort. That's when the first real theory took hold. Not that he was faking. Not that it was stress. But that he had something. Something real, something serious, something that wasn't going away. The whispers spread fast, solidifying into certainty. "You know what it is, right?" one guy murmured. "No," came the reply, "but I know what it looks like." Another voice, lower, grimmer. Ain't no way. I'm telling you, I've seen it before. And just like that, belief became inevitability. Diddy had something. And in here, it was only a matter of time before everyone knew exactly what it was. Rumors inside prison don't just circulate, they evolve, shifting from harmless whispers to dangerous truths. In a place where stories aren't just told but believed, belief itself becomes power. And right now, the most powerful force inside MDC wasn't Diddy's reputation, it was the growing certainty that something was seriously wrong with him. It started small, the kind of murmurs that barely register at first. A hushed exchange in the yard, a quick glance between cellmates. You seen how he moving? Dude don't look right. Maybe it's stress. Nah, it's something else. The words were vague, but the way voices dropped when they were spoken told you everything. Then one afternoon, someone finally said it out loud. You think he got it? It was just a question, thrown out casually to test the waters, but the silence that followed said more than any answer could. No one laughed. No one shut it down. That's when it became real. In prison, things only become real when people start believing them. And it didn't take long before the rumor found a name: HIV. At first, it was whispered like a half-joke, something to see who would react. But by the second time, the third, the 10th, it wasn't funny anymore. Someone claimed they overheard a nurse mention his medical file. Another swore a CO had let slip that Diddy was on medication most inmates couldn't get. A guy working laundry said he'd seen one of Diddy's shirts come through with blood on the collar, like he'd been coughing into it. The stories weren't just spreading, they were hardening. The turning point came when two older inmates, men who had been inside long enough to separate real prison gossip from nonsense, spoke about it in the common area. Been eating at him. That's how it starts. Could be stress. Could be. But stress don't make you lose weight that fast. That was it. A simple conversation, barely more than a few words, but the certainty in their voices made my stomach tighten. When guys like that started believing something, it might as well have come straight from the warden himself. The rumor had taken hold, and the air inside the block shifted. It wasn't just talk anymore, it was action. The guys who used to sit with Diddy at meals stopped. The ones who'd dap him up in passing kept their hands to themselves. And Diddy noticed. He wasn't stupid. He could feel the shift, see it in the way people moved around him like he was contagious. His posture changed, becoming more guarded, more aware of how much space he was taking up. He stopped making eye contact, spoke less, kept his head down. One day, someone brushed past him in the hallway, just a little too close, and I saw it, the way his whole body tensed for half a second. In here, you don't need to be told when you're being watched, you just feel it. The few who still spoke to him did it quietly, almost like they didn't want to be seen with him. Some weren't even subtle. I watched one guy stand up from a table the moment Diddy sat down, shaking his head as he walked away. Another straight up refused a cigarette Diddy offered, backing away like it was poison. And then came the final confirmation: the guards. COs don't usually get involved in inmate business. They see everything, hear everything, but unless it disrupts their routine, they let it ride. That's why it stood out when they started treating Diddy differently. Small things, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention, but I was. When he handed off his food tray, the CO took it like it was contaminated, barely touching it before sliding it down the line. During cell searches, they avoided his bed and belongings, like getting too close was a risk. And Diddy saw it too. That's when the paranoia set in. The next time I passed his cell, he was sitting on the edge of his bunk, hands clasped, knee bouncing, eyes darting at every sound. He wasn't relaxed. This was a man who had spent years crafting an image of control, someone who once built an empire on being untouchable. Now, he looked like he was waiting for the inevitable. In here, perception is reality. It doesn't matter if something is true once enough people believe it, it might as well be. And right now, everyone believed Diddy had HIV. By the next week, the rumors had taken a darker turn. It wasn't just about him being sick anymore, it was about how he got sick. And that's when things got dangerous. Because in prison, once people start speculating about the how, stories turn into accusations. And accusations? They get people killed. The prison infirmary was one of the few places in MDC with a different energy. It wasn't loud like the yard or tense like the mess hall. Instead, it was quiet, sterile, not in a way that made you feel clean, but in a way that made you feel exposed. The sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with the stale odor of sweat and sickness. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow. Lately, Diddy had been spending more time there. It started with quick, unrecorded visits, the kind that didn't make it onto any official log but were still noticed by inmates who paid attention. Then, the visits stretched longer. He would disappear for hours, returning drained, rubbing his arms where blood had been drawn, moving slower than before. The pattern was impossible to ignore. But what turned quiet suspicion into certainty was a single mistake, a slip-up by someone who should have known better. It happened one late afternoon when the infirmary was busier than usual. A handful of inmates stood in line, some faking symptoms just to escape their cells, others there with real issues, untreated wounds, persistent fevers. Diddy sat off to the side, silent, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. He wasn't complaining, wasn't making a scene, just waiting. But waiting for what? That was the question lingering in the air. Toward the back of the room, a nurse spoke in hushed tones with a doctor. Normally, inmates didn't pay attention to those conversations, just medical jargon, numbers, paperwork. But this time was different. The doctor flipped through a file, brow furrowed, exhaustion visible in his posture. Maybe that's why he slipped, why he spoke without checking who might be listening. "He's going to need more tests," he muttered. "His numbers are still high." The nurse glanced up, lowering her voice. "You think it's that?" The doctor exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into his tone. "I don't know. But if it is, he's known for a while." That was all it took. The words weren't meant for anyone outside that conversation. Quiet, uncertain, easy to miss. But they reached the wrong ears. An inmate sitting nearby, pretending to be focused on something else, caught every word. He didn't react, didn't flinch. That's how you know someone has heard something dangerous. They don't panic, they absorb. Silently he stood, slipped out of the infirmary, and made his way back to the unit. By the time he reached his cell, he had already rewritten the story in his mind, sharpening it for impact. Not the way he actually heard it, no, that wouldn't hit hard enough. It had to be clearer, more definite. The words HIV and Diddy had never left the doctor's mouth, but by the time the rumor spread through the block, it might as well have been written in official records. "It's confirmed," the whispers said. Doctor said it himself. That's how it works in prison. Truth doesn't matter. Confidence does. Say something with enough certainty, and it becomes reality. By the time Diddy returned from the infirmary, the entire unit already knew. They weren't gathered in an obvious way, but they were watching. Conversations quieted as he passed, eyes trailing him like they were watching a man walk to his own execution. He must have felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of silent judgment. His world, already unsteady, had just collapsed further. In that moment, Diddy wasn't just another inmate anymore. He was a sick inmate, and in prison, that was worse than anything else. Rumors in prison don't stay words for long, they turn into actions. People had already been keeping their distance from him, but now, the avoidance was blatant. At dinner, nobody sat near him. He walked into the mess hall, tray in hand, scanning for an open seat. There were plenty, but no one shifted to make room. One old-timer, a man usually above prison gossip, made his stance clear. When Diddy sat down across from him, the man didn't say a word. He simply stood, left his half-eaten tray behind, and walked away. That was when Diddy realized it was over. Later that night, I saw him at the sink, washing his hands. Not once, not a quick rinse, but over and over. Soap foamed, rinsed away, then foamed again as he scrubbed, slow and deliberate, like he was trying to scrub off something deeper than dirt. When he finally stopped, he stared into the tiny scratched mirror above the sink. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he didn't look angry or powerful, not even scared. Just empty. The story spread beyond the unit. Inmates working laundry overheard COs talking. Guys in other blocks started asking questions. Is it true? You think he really got it? And just like that, the rumor became fact. Once something becomes fact in prison, it never fades. Paranoia settles in, and once it does, it never lets go. It wraps around your thoughts like vines, twisting everything darker, heavier. In MDC, paranoia isn't just inconvenient, it's survival. You have to know when people are talking about you, when the mood shifts, because if you don't, you won't last long. Diddy had always been the one watching, the one in control. Even when the guards held the keys and his name no longer carried the weight it once did, he still moved like a man who was untouchable. But now, that power was gone. Now, he was the one being watched. It started with whispers, quiet murmurs traded in the yard, over dinner trays, behind cell doors after lights out. Nothing direct, just talk, but talk in prison always turns into something more. Diddy felt it before he heard it. The tension in the air, the way conversations died when he approached, the looks inmates gave him, not fear, not respect, but something colder, something closer to disgust. He tried to tell himself it was in his head, just rumors. But paranoia doesn't allow for logic. One afternoon in the common area, he caught a group huddled at the back table, voices low. He couldn't catch the words, but the quick flicks of their eyes in his direction, the slight shake of one man's head as he muttered it, was enough. That night, Diddy sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor, his mind racing. Who started it? Who was spreading it? Was it an inmate? A guard? A leak from outside? Then the darkest thought hit him. What if it wasn't just a rumor? What if someone was making sure it became real? From that moment, everything changed. He avoided certain areas, stopped sitting in the common room, skipped meals at his usual tables. He kept his back to the wall, scanning the room every time he entered. It was subtle but obvious, because in prison, everyone notices everything. They noticed how he stopped using the water fountains, how he asked for sealed bottles whenever he could, how he wiped his hands on his pants after touching doors. At first, they laughed. Man, what's he so scared of? Acting like we're gonna breathe on him wrong. But the laughter faded quickly. It wasn't funny anymore, not when Diddy himself seemed to believe it. His paranoia wasn't just about inmates. It stretched beyond the prison walls. He knew the media was circling, waiting to drag him down further. Every day, new headlines dropped, more allegations, more women, more damning details for the prosecution. But this was different. If the outside world believed he had HIV, it wouldn't just cost him his freedom. It would erase his legacy. That fear pushed him to start asking questions. He pulled aside a CO, trying to sound casual. "You'll hear anything about me outside?" The guard didn't even look at him. "I don't keep up with celebrity," Diddy nodded, pretending not to care, but inside, he felt the last shred of control slip away. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. When did it start? Who started it? An inmate? A doctor? A guard? He thought back to the infirmary visits, the doctor's expression, the hushed conversations between nurses. Had they leaked something? Or was this just the natural evolution of prison gossip? The next day, he tested the waters, watching reactions, throwing out comments to see what stuck. At breakfast, he leaned toward a guy who used to talk to him before all this. "You ever notice how people start acting different when they're scared of something?" The man barely glanced up. "What you mean?" Diddy shrugged, forcing indifference. Just saying, people love rumors in here. Ain't always real though. The guy didn't answer. Just kept eating. That told Diddy everything he needed to know. They already believed. Diddy's paranoia intensified from that moment. He avoided railings, skipped the communal waits in the yard, and kept an unusual distance from everyone. The more he withdrew, the more the rumors grew. Look at him, acting strange. Told you he knows he's sick. That broke him because, in prison, the worst thing you can do is confirm the whispers. The next morning, he sat on his bunk, staring at the wall. He looked smaller, his jumpsuit looser, his face hollow. His hands were clasped, fingers tapping together a nervous tick he probably didn't notice. For the first time, he wasn't controlling the story, and that was what crushed him most. Diddy had always read the room. It's how he built his empire, stayed ahead, and knew when to push or retreat. Power was never just about what you had, it was about what people thought you had. For years, everyone believed Diddy was untouchable. But inside these walls, that illusion vanished. First, it was the inmates, the whispers, the stares, the subtle way people edged away. Then, it was the guards. That's when he knew the threat was real. Guards don't buy into gossip unless there's weight behind it. The first sign came during morning roll call. Guards usually rushed through the list without glancing up. But that day, C.O. Hawkins lingered, his gaze colder, more deliberate. Diddy kept his face blank, but inside, he felt it the shift. The guards didn't just hear the rumors, they believed them. It happened again in the mess hall. Standing in line for food, he noticed the hesitation. The CO handing out trays paused, fingers gripping the edge tighter, like he was debating whether to let go. Diddy took the tray, his mind racing. That hesitation spoke volumes. They weren't just observing him now, they were judging. The moment that sealed it came from a young CO who'd never paid Diddy much attention. During rounds, he muttered just loud enough, "Gotta start wearing gloves when I handle his stuff." It wasn't a direct insult, just a passing remark, almost playful. But Diddy heard it, and when he snapped his head up, the CO didn't flinch. He just smirked, daring Diddy to react. Diddy didn't. What could he do? Inmates lie. But when guards start making jokes, it's because they believe the story. The sickness might have been a rumor, but his reputation? That was infected for sure. From there, the change was obvious. Guards stood farther away during searches. They avoided touching him unless absolutely necessary. Diddy caught their side glances, the blank expressions hiding quiet judgment. Worse were the ones who looked at him with pity. Disgust would have been easier. Disgust meant they still saw him as powerful. But pity? That meant they saw him as nothing. And in prison, once the guards dismiss you, the inmates follow. Diddy decided to test it. He always moved smart, knowing who to greet and who to ignore. But today, he wanted proof. In the yard, he walked to a water station near a group of COs. Normally, they'd ignore him, he wasn't a troublemaker. But this time, one shifted aside. Not far, just half a step. Enough to say, "Stay back." Diddy filled his cup, took a slow sip, and walked away, heart pounding though his face stayed calm. They weren't scared of what he could do, they feared what he had. That night, Diddy sat on his bunk, rubbing his face. His mind wouldn't slow down. Was this planned? A setup to break him? He remembered the doctor's slip-up in the infirmary, the inmates twisting the words, and now the guards feeding the fire. Diddy knew how power worked. Truth didn't matter, only perception. And right now, everyone believed he was dying. Whether true or not, once fear fades and pity replaces it, you're already dead. Diddy realized this place might kill him before the trial even began. He'd always controlled the narrative, every scandal, accusation, and headline. He understood media better than anyone, how to spin it, bury it, or distract the public. But here, he had no control. The rumors started inside, but didn't stay there. Word eventually leaked, and nothing spreads faster than gossip involving someone like Diddy. It began with a blog post, a low-tier gossip site usually focused on influencers, but occasionally landing real scoops. They didn't claim certainty they didn't have to. Sources say Diddy's health is in question after secret hospital visit. That headline was enough. Within hours, bigger outlets picked it up: TMZ, The Shade Room, even mainstream sites. They all phrased it carefully but pushed the same message. Is Diddy hiding a serious illness? The internet erupted. Social media exploded with speculation, jokes, and wild theories. Some claimed Diddy had been sick for years, hiding it from the public. Others swore they knew the exact diagnosis despite zero evidence. And then there were the trolls, eager to watch a giant fall. Diddy getting his karma package delivered. First the charges, now this? God's got the final say. Diddy out here playing GTA in real life just hit 5 stars. The cruelty was endless. Truth didn't matter, people just wanted a show. The worst part? Diddy didn't even know right away. Prison moves slower than the internet. No phones. No notifications. By the time he heard, the damage was done. It was 2 guards talking, just loud enough. You see that online? They saying he's sick. Yeah. Not shocked. Diddy's head snapped up, but they walked on. No names mentioned, but he knew. Confirmation came hours later. An inmate working laundry, sometimes near a radio, leaned over. Yo, they talking about you outside, he muttered. Diddy frowned. What you mean? The guy chuckled. They saying you sick, man. For the first time, Diddy felt real fear. Inside, rumors were dangerous, but outside, they were permanent. If the world believed he was sick, it didn't matter if it was true. Perception was reality. He paced his cell all night, wondering, who leaked it? A guard? Medical staff? An inmate? He always had enemies, but this felt personal. It wasn't just an attack on his image, it was career-ending. The next day, Diddy called his lawyers. He needed intel. How bad was it? What could be done? But the damage was already spreading. It's all speculation, his lawyer said, but it's moving fast. Reporters are calling. They want confirmation. Diddy's jaw tightened. What are you telling them? Silence. Too long of a pause. We're denying it. But your silence isn't helping. Silence, that's what fueled the fire. In Diddy's world, silence meant guilt. Deny it, and they'd call him a liar. Ignore it, and the rumors grew louder. For the first time, Diddy was losing without ever stepping into the ring. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, ears tuned to the prison's background noise: coughs, metal doors clanging, a CO's distant radio. He thought about everything he'd built: his empire, his legacy, all crumbling because of a single lie. Because perception was everything. Diddy had spent decades convincing the world he was untouchable. Now they believed he was finished.